Yeah, hello, good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this event. This is supposed to be a webinar on scholarly publishing in Africa, challenges and the way forward. What we have tried to do is to invite few people, about 60 to 70, be physically present in this virtual event. In other words, in this assembly, we have some people to bridge the gap between the physical and the virtual. And I would like to start by thanking all of you for making the sacrifice to be here. I'd like to thank people who registered online. As at today, more than 600 people have registered online. And we are grateful for all who registered, and we are looking forward to a very great conversation. In this conversation, let me also say that I'll start by thanking also the staff of Adonis Abbey Publishers. They've really been incredible managing to put this together. I also thank our media partners, the News Chronicle. This will be streamed live on their media platforms, web, Facebook, YouTube, and X. So if you try to log in and for some reasons you are not able to gain access, you can try to follow the live streaming on any of their social media platforms. Let me just say a brief thing about Adonis Abbey Publishers. It was actually incorporated on the 18th of March 2003, just a day after my own birthday. And like most small businesses, we started in my kitchen in Southeast London. And through the efforts of our editors and several others working, we've managed to, remain on course. As of today, we've published more than 160 books. We currently publish 27 journals. All of them are indexed. We also hope that by June this year, we're adding an extra 10 journals. So we'll be publishing 37 journals by June this year. And I'm happy to say that since we started journal publishing in June 2004, not one of our journals has come under. As a matter of fact, out of our journals, 8 are indexed in Scopus, and 15 are accredited by DOHET, the regulator of higher education in South Africa. 2 are accredited by UGC-CARE, the regulator of higher education in India. And we have one of our journals, African Journal of Business and Economic Research, listed in the Australian Business Deans Council. And the journey is still far, but I believe we are making progress. In our own books, as I say, we've published over 160 books. We are publishing partner with the Web of Sciences Book Citation Index. Being a publishing partner qualifies you to submit manuscripts for consideration in that index. And for books that are accepted and indexed by BKCI, that is Book Citation Index, it leads to a high level of discoverability, and which often translates into more citations. And as we all know, citations, aggregate citations, is what they use when they want to determine university ranking and even the ranking of scholars. So for this seminar, basically we want to look at the publishing environment in Africa and challenges and the way forward. And we have started by assembling all the panelists, 6 of them, including the moderator. They are not only distinguished academics, they are also editors of our journals, which means they bring in not just the academic knowledge, but from practical experience of editing journals that we publish. The moderator, Professor Fosina Nyatanga, is at the University of KwaZulu in Pietermaritzburg in South Africa. She edits our journal called African Journal of Business and Economic Research, which was set up in 2006 as our second journal. The other panelist, Professor Anthony Nwafo, is at the Department of Mercantile and Private Law at the University of Lesotho. Professor Nwafo is the editor of our journal, African Journal of Law and Justice System. The journal is the fastest we got to be indexed by Scopus. We only started publishing it in 2022. Last year it was accredited by DOHET, and this year it was accepted for indexing by Scopus. Normally, typically, it's very rare for us to just submit journals and it's accepted on the first submission. Quite often, if you submit the first one and you're failed, the journal is quarantined for 3 to 5 years. And when you resubmit it, there's no guarantee that you will make it. And if you submit and you're quarantined for anything less than 3 years, like 2 years, it means they've seen something. There's a green light that you have a good prospect of making it. And when you resubmit after the quarantine period, you normally will attach a letter indicating how you have addressed issues flagged by Scopus. So we're quite happy that in our first submission, the journal made it. The other panelist is Professor Hisham Fahoud, who is from the Faculty of Medicine at Al Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt. He's the editor of a journal called African Journal of Medicine. This is one of the 10 journals we are launching or rather that will be making their debut in June this year. And then you have Dr. Musain Khalil Babatunde, who has been the editor of Journal of Nation Building and Policy Studies since 2017. And she teaches at the University of Government and International Studies at the University of Warwick. Then there is also another panelist, Professor Samville Victor Manyele, who is from Chemical and Process Engineering Department at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. He is the editor of one of the journals again that we are launching in June this year. That journal is called African Journal of Advances in Engineering and Technology. And then you have Professor Aaron Chizumba, who is from the Department of Communications at the University of South Africa. He is also the editor of our journal called Journal of African Films and Diaspora Studies. JAVIS is a Q2 journal that is indexed by Scopus and run by Shimago. And is a Q2 journal in the sense that journals by Shimago are ranked whether you are Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. Q1 journals are typically the journals in the top 25% category in their category. And quite often they are the journals from the global north that are publishing for several years, 20, 30, 40 years. And so if you are ranked Q2, that means you are in the percentile 26 to 50, which is regarded as quite high in your category. You are ranked in that category globally. So JAVDIS is one of our journals, and we're hoping that in no distant future, we probably will be able to make it into Q1. Then you have Dr. Marian Jungudo. Dr. Marian Jungudo has just been promoted as an associate professor at Nigerian Army University in Biu, Borno State. She is the editor of our Journal of African History, Archaeology, and Tourism. So for the seminar, how do we want it to organize? Our thought is that, I have to mention the keynote speakers. The keynote speakers are the people that in Nigerian lingo, street speak, you call them heavyweights. The first keynote speaker is Professor David Mills. He is the Director, Center for Global Higher Education at the Oxford University. He will be speaking on from defiance to respect, Afro-structuring the future of academic journal publishing. Professor Mills has a lot of experience in this field. He will talk about challenges facing West African academic publishing within a global knowledge economy structured by bibliometric, what they call bibliometric coloniality. That is the domination of the indexes, Web of Science, Scopus, IBSS, the domination of databases, such databases from the global north, and the reproduction of that inequality, because quite often the journals that make it into those databases are also journals from the global north. So he will point to ways that publishers and journal editors can build the academic profiles and scholarly reputation of their journals. Professor Mills is the co-author of the article, Getting By in a Bibliometric Economy, Scholarly Publishing and Academic Credibility in the Nigerian Academy, which was published in the year 2022. He's also rather the co-editor of a book, Who Counts? Ghanaian Academic Publishing and Global Science, which was published in 2023. The other keynote speaker is Dr. Savo Helita, who is a researcher and educator whose research focuses on decolonization of knowledge, higher education, internationalization, international research collaboration, and analysis of foreign aid flows. And he will be speaking on challenging bibliometric coloniality, building African and global South knowledge platforms. That is when we say coloniality, in this is the system, as I mentioned, system of domination of global academic publishing by the bibliometric indexes from the global north. His published works include the co-authored article, Bibliometric Coloniality in South Africa, Critical Review of the Indexes of Accredited Journals, which he published in 2024. And also, Decolonization is Not Even a Footnote, on the dominant ideologies and smoke screens in South African higher education. So how do we want to structure the conversation? Our thought is that the two keynote speakers will speak, and then each of the 6 panelists will take turns in discussing the papers. As a matter of fact, we have structured in such a way that three of the panelists will discuss Professor Mills' paper, and the other 3 will also discuss Dr. Savo Helita's paper. We are hoping after that there will be an opportunity for question and answers, but do feel free at any point to send messages, questions that will also transmit to the speakers. And we hope that we all will enjoy ourselves in this conversation. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, great. I think technology is one of those things that, as Professor Mills was saying, is great, but it's quite challenging. But we're grateful to be here. And colleagues, we are running behind time. I think Professor Mills, you are the first to present. And I would like to believe you were already introduced to the audience. So I will not reintroduce you. And then after that, we'll have Dr. Helita make his presentation. You each have 20 minutes to present, and I will stop you after 20 minutes because we are really running out of time. Thank you. Over to you, Prof. Mills. I hope you can unmute. I think we're having also the same problem. Can you please give him permission to unmute himself?
Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm just going to put my slides on, and can I check you can see that? Good. Okay. So thank you very much, Fenice and Professor Dibe. and honoured guests. It's a pleasure to be here and to be starting off this important birthday celebration for Adonis and Abbey. My name is David Mills. I'm a University of Oxford professor. I'm also a director of African Books Collective, which has been going as a distributor for African books for almost 40 years. So today I'm going to talk on the topic of from defiance to respect. And I'm using Penda Ba, who is a colleague in Senegal, who talks about Afro-structuring. I'm going to talk about Afro-structuring academic journal publishing. And I will talk for 15 minutes. I will try not to talk too fast, but please say if I speak too quickly. I'm going to give you a bit of history, a little bit of a history lesson. I'm going to show you some numbers, and I'm going to reflect on the challenges that a journal publisher like Adonis and Abbey has had to face and has done brilliantly to overcome, and then to think about the future. So this is my first slide. Some of you may know who this is. If you don't know, you may have heard of his daughter, who was also a very sort of tragic figure. This is Robert Maxwell. He was one of the first big commercial academic publishers. Here he is, very proud of himself, standing on top of London in the 1970s. He grew up in a small village in Czechoslovakia, and after he fought in the war for the British Army, and very quickly realized he was very good at doing deals. He was a bit of a Trumpian figure, I think. He lived in a fantasy world, but he was also a very, very skillful deal maker. And he knew and understood how important scholarly publishing was. He was based in Berlin after the war, and he realized how precious the knowledge that German scientists had was. And he managed to do a deal to sell their journals at a time when German science had been blocked from being distributed. He then went on and set up a publisher called Pergamon Press. And over the course of about 40 years, he went on to launch 700 journals, 700. And one of the things that makes him very important was that he could see the need to internationalize publishing, but also he could see how much money there was to make from publishing. And here's a picture of one of the parties that he threw for his editors and his business backers in a big marquee in Oxford. He was very good at wooing people, and when he got into real trouble for fraud, he found that his editors were very loyal to him because he'd looked after them very well. He'd given them a lot of freedom. His model was to sell, to publish a lot of journals, to make them very expensive, to expand them very fast, to launch journals in new areas, and to often call them international journal of, okay, to make them global, to sell them globally. And he set the example, I would say, for where academic publishing went after World War II. And in some ways, we all are now living in the shadow of the commercial world that he created, and that he competed with Elsevier in creating as well, because Elsevier was also very much expanding during this period after the war, when there was so much money being put into science. Eventually, he stole money he bought the Mirror newspaper, he stole money from the pension fund, he had to sell his journal business, and then he disappeared off a boat in the Mediterranean. It's a very tragic story, but I think his legacy lives on. There are now many, many commercial journals, as we know, and they've continued to expand very fast. Now, one more bit of history that's important here is another man who is very ambitious. This man here is someone called Eugene Garfield. he was someone who called himself an information scientist. And he too was working after the Second World War at a time when there was so much science being done that librarians couldn't keep up with all the knowledge that was being created and all the journals that were being launched by publishers like Pergamon, but also like by Elsevier and other publishers. So he came up with a great idea that he would photocopy the abstracts pages of a lot of science journals, and then staple them together and send out a little booklet to librarians, which was called Current Contents. And this caught on very fast, because if you're a librarian, you wanted to know just how many journals there were and which journals to subscribe to. Now, this, as you can see, he started in 1958. By the 70s, he was selling a lot of these little booklets of abstracts. And this gave him the money to launch the Science Citation Index, which was a hugely expensive, ambitious plan to try and come up with an index of knowledge. Okay, it was not an index like we know an index in the everyday sense, like an alphabetical index to a book. It was an index based on which authors cited which other authors. It was a very clever understanding of science. He wanted to trace where knowledge flowed from. And so at that point, when there were very basic computers, and he had to have a lot of people typing in journal journal references from a selection of journals, and then by assembling a massive computer program, you would then see which article cited which other article, and then you could gradually build a map of citations. This was a citation index. So you can see here, I've put in an anthropologist called Raymond Firth, R. Firth, and you can see that his books have been cited in this first edition of the Science Citation Index 4 times. And there's details of which journal it's cited in, what page number, and so on. So initially this was all done on paper. Now, of course, it's all on the web. But the big challenge he faced was which journals to cite, which journals to put into his index. He couldn't do them all. There were already, by the 60s, there were far too many journals. And so he chose the journals that were already in his current contents to a certain extent, because those are the journals people wanted to know what was in the abstract anyway, because these companies were often buying these current contents. And so you can see here in the first edition of the Science Citation Index that there were no African journals. There was 3 Indian journals, but as you can see, nearly all the journals were from 2/3 of the journals were from the US and the UK. And he justified this later by saying, well, you can't index all the journals. And he justified it by saying most citations are in the most important journals. And so he came up with a law of scattering. It was an inverse power law, those of you who know about maths. So the argument would be that 80% of the citations were in 20% of the journals. And this was his justification initially for not indexing a broad diversity of the world's journals. Instead, the numbers did gradually expand, as you can see. By the late 1990s, the index was indexing 6,000, but still proportionally very, very few African journals were indexed. And that remains the same today. And there are some South African journals, and clearly there are now Egyptian journals and North African journals, but very, very few sub-Saharan African journals. And that's the legacy of this history. And I would say he never made any money out of this citation index. It was very, very expensive to do, and he eventually had to sell it. And the reason it's so important now, and the reason it's now worth so much money, is that, of course, when the first world rankings of universities were created in about 2003, 2004, the Chinese were the first to create the world ranking of universities. They had to decide how they would rank universities. And an obvious way of doing that was to use some numbers on which authors, which institutions got the most citations. So now here, if you look even this year in the Times Higher Education World University Ranking, you can see that citation impact counts for 15% of the ranking, and research productivity counts for another 5%, and research reputation for another almost 20%. So that's why this citation index has become so important for universities around the world, because if you can boost your number of citations, then you boost the ranking of your university, which is why universities across Africa expect us to publish in index journals, which is why the index has become so powerful and so important. And it's why it's shaping how we work as academics and where we publish, and why it's so hard for African journals to be visible. And I know Savo will carry on talking about this in the next talk. This is almost like a sort of a speeding up roundabout. We're all going faster and faster. This is a graph of 10 years of academic publishing, and the number of articles that each publisher is producing, the major publishers, is going up still at a pace that's really unprecedented. Elsevier, which is one of the biggest publishers, has increased, it's almost doubled the number of articles it's produced. And then some of the new challenger companies like MDPI and Frontiers have also increased very fast. So we're all having to publish faster and faster. And if I was to describe what's happening, and this is my suggestion, is that we're seeing a funny combination of a world where reputation still matters for some journals, where trust still matters. We respect some journals enormously. Credibility for us as academics is really important. So we're seeing some journals that still rely on what's called a credibility economy, what I call that credibility economy, where there's status associated with not publishing too much, with having good editorial gatekeeping, carefully planned editorial boards, diverse community of editors who work together, slow scholarship, you could call it. And certainly a publisher like Taylor and Francis has many African studies journals like that. It calls them its core African studies journals. But Taylor and Francis also has a mega journal, what you might call a mega journal, which is interdisciplinary. It's called Cogent Social Science. Its focus is much more on expansion, on publishing a lot of papers, on being quite inclusive, on turning things around quite fast. It too is indexed. So if you're in a hurry, you might choose that in journals publishing. So there, the publisher is relying on outputs, on publishing a lot of material, on benefiting from the metadata. So there then are three economies. There's a credibility economy, an output economy, and a data economy, because data is, of course, really valuable. Metadata is really precious. The way in which publishers make their journals visible is by ensuring that the metadata is findable. And Elsevier no longer calls itself a publisher. It now calls itself a data analytics company. So this is now the contemporary world of publishing. It's a world of analytics, it's a world of data, it's a world of high productivity and of accelerationism. And there's a lot of money to be made, but there's also a lot of risk for the big publishers. And those of you who know about Wiley, it bought Hindawi, and then it had to retract 10,000 articles from Hindawi journals because they'd been sort of compromised by authors who wanted were too much of a hurry to get published and bought authorship or just write things which weren't high quality. So they'd lost the attention to quality that we all value as editors and authors. We want our journals to be credible. We want the conversation that our journals support to be valuable. We want to be cited, but we want it to be cited by people who make those citations meaningful. We don't want citations just for the sake of it. But there is a citation economy, and that's a real problem now for many authors and publishers. So as you all know, and you all will be far too aware, this is a headline from last week's University World News, the system continues to marginalize African journals and African editors and African publishers. This is This is not what we thought independence would bring to Africa. If you think back to the early 60s, there was a great hope that there would be new independent journal publishing opportunities with independence. And certainly many Kenyan publishers were launched in the 1960s, but OUP and Macmillan were all too keen to make a lot of money out of African journal textbook publishing, that they hung on to their textbook contracts. They didn't want to hand over to African competitors. So even if there were book series like the Three Crowns series, literary publishing, which was great, still the main control they had was of their commercial textbook publishing. And so that was the reason that matters, is that many publishers cross-subsidize. Textbook publishing can fund other forms of publishing, but if you can't make a living out of textbook publishing, it's harder to start off and build your own publishing infrastructure. A few more figures. I won't take too long. I know that I only have 5 minutes left. Ethiopia, here's an example of a really rich, diverse journal ecosystem. If those of you who know about African Journals Online, it's an important web platform. There are 61 Ethiopian journals on African Journals Online. But then you look at DOAJ, which is the Directory of Open Access Journals, and there are fewer. There are about 10, 15. But then you look at Scopus, there are only 8, and 6 are active. Then you look at World Web of Science, the original citation index, there are only 2. So again and again, we see this problem where we have a rich, strong research culture in many African countries, but they're not indexed in the top global indexes. Top, by top, I mean a narrow definition of excellence, controlled by an American publishing model. This is a slide about African journals from Nigeria, many of which that have been discontinued from Scopus, either because they weren't publishing regularly enough or because there were questions raised about their editorial boards or about their timing of publishing. So this for me tells us that there are many journals that are disappearing, and therefore knowledge is disappearing as well. And so if you look at this slide of the top 15 Scopus journals that were published from Nigeria, half of them have been discontinued from Scopus in the last 10 years. And therefore, if they're discontinued, then their journals are no longer indexed, and therefore those journal articles are no longer visible. And this seems to me to be a real shame. I'm going to just come to compare 2 journals very briefly. A journal, of course, that was one of the first, founded by Adonis Abbey, African Renaissance, founded in 2003. Compare it quickly with this Taylor and Francis mega journal called Cogent Social Sciences. And if you compare them, you can see that one on the right, which is the African Renaissance, has published steadily for the last almost 2 decades, about 50 to 100 articles a year. And it's found it hard to get citations. This is the right-hand images on this slide. On the left, the black boxes, you can see that this new Taylor and Francis journal, this mega journal that launched in 2015, it expanded very quickly. It publishes lots. It got lots of citations. Why is it getting citations very quickly? Because, of course, Taylor and Francis is very good at publishing metadata, at getting people making their journals visible. So this is the challenge that African journals face. It's how you compete with the mega publishers and their platforms. One last slide on this journal, Cogent Social Science. It's a slide with African universities at the top of the rankings. That's because it waives publication fees. It's an open access journal that charges, but it waives its publication fees, its APCs for African authors. So you can see here that African authors are publishing from Ghana, from South Africa, from Nigeria, from Ethiopia. They're publishing in this journal. These are authors who potentially could be publishing in African journals. And as many authors have published in this journal in 2023, as in all of the top African studies journals that are what they call the core African studies Taylor and Francis journals. And so you can see that Taylor and Francis are attracting more and more papers to their journals at the cost of other publishers. And I could also look at other, Elsevier has a multidisciplinary journal called Helion, and Sage Open also is trying to attract African authors. So I'm almost finished. I think what we see here is a challenge that we face an ecosystem for many of our journals that is an ecosystem of scarcity. There isn't much money for African research publishing. If you're lucky, you get subscribers, and certainly Adonis and Abbey have done very well at building subscription database. If you're unlucky, you have to survive on a shoestring. You may well just fund yourself with a bit of institutional subsidy, or you go with a global publisher like Brill de Groote, Walter Kluwer's, and or a South African commercial publisher like IOSIS. South Africa is an exception because it does have subsidies for publishing, which means that there are commercial publishers that are emerging. But it's still precarious. It isn't secure because you can't rely on those subsidies, and those subsidies often go to authors rather than to journals. So my last slide then. Thank you for your time, colleagues. It's been lovely to chat to you. I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. I think the future has to be what Adonis and Abbey have done, and what Penda Bar calls in her editorial to this Global Africa special issue called Publishing Africa. She calls for an Afro structure of scientific publishing that's endogenously financed, open to all, attentive to diversity, and recognizing a real range of scientific work. We need these structures because we need to compete in the face of the large commercial publishers. And the way in which we do that perhaps starts as defiance. I think Adonis and Abbey, Jennifer once described it as guerrilla marketing. You have to really fight for every subscription in the face of these big publishers. You have to fight for credibility, but we need resilient knowledge ecosystems. I don't think necessarily you can escape from the global marketplace. You have to work against it. You have to work inside it. And it's partly defiance, but from defiance, you can build respect. And I think the respect that is coming from new African publishers, from new open access, diamond open access journals, that's also an important development for the future that potentially could also transform African publishing. If you'd like to read more about what I've done, I did a book on Ghanaian academic publishing. It's called Who Counts? It was with African Minds, which is a South African open access publisher. And I tell some of these stories in more depth there. But for now, I'm going to stop and wish Adonis and Afi a big happy birthday. Thank you very much for this invitation to speak. And I look forward to hearing from Savo and other colleagues. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mills, for that very interesting presentation. I think your slides got stuck and we couldn't see them, but I think we all listened in carefully. I think without wasting time, I'll call on our next speaker to jump onto the presentation. But I think could they please be unmuted because we'll give it permission to speak.
Can you tell me if you can hear me, because I think I'm able to speak now.
Yes, I can hear you, Dr. Helitas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I will also try to be compact and not spend too much time, because I think I'm looking forward to a discussion, to comments and feedback, and to I'm hoping there'll be a Q&A session as well. I'm going to speak about bibliometric coloniality and how we can go about building African and broader global South knowledge platforms and scholarly indexes, and whether that is a good idea or not. The ideas that I'm going to speak about here are based on some of my previous research. I've worked with a colleague from the University of Zululand in South Africa, Dr. Pedro Mzileni, on a paper where we looked at bibliometric coloniality in South Africa. And I'll speak about it in a moment, what we did in our paper. But an important thing to mention is that it is David Mills and colleagues who inspired us to look at this, to actually ask some of the questions that we thought were relevant in South Africa. And it was the book Who Counts on academic publishing in Ghana, but also not just in Ghana, because in the book they look at South Africa, they look at Nigeria, they look at our hosts today as well as a very positive, very good example of how things can be done to challenge bibliometric coloniality. And I do understand that the term bibliometric coloniality has been mentioned before, but in the book Who Counts, it was really framed in a very important way to give us also an idea, not just an idea, but also to give us an avenue through which, or a lens through which to look, through which we decided to look at the specific South African experience or challenges with where we can publish. And I'll speak about it in more detail in a moment, and what we found and what are the pressures that we have for those colleagues who are affiliated with South African universities. And in the way that David and colleagues framed it in the book Who Counts, they spoke about bibliometric coloniality as this system or structure of domination of global academic publishing, where you have a handful of corporations and a number of academic bodies, most of them based in the global north, in Europe and North America, and they basically control academic publishing globally, and they also not just control these indexes, these very powerful indexes, but also serve as gatekeepers of what counts as academic relevance, what counts as credibility and quality in academic publishing. So in our paper, in our research, Dr. Mizileni and I also engage with the term bibliometric coloniality in terms of the broader scholarly engagements with the term coloniality and what it means in terms of coloniality of knowledge, the ways that coloniality and Eurocentric epistemic hegemony continue to influence what we do at universities, what we do in academic publishing, what we do in terms of knowledge production, curriculum, and everything else. And in our paper, we frame bibliometric coloniality within the broader concept of coloniality. And Professor Belon Lobogaceni, for example, speaks about coloniality in terms of linking to the knowledge project being this colonial-like power relations and the structure that continues to influence what universities do, what academics do or can do, and how far they can go in a lot of things that they do in terms of knowledge production, dissemination, and everything else. So I did speak earlier about the global academic publishing industry being dominated largely by these big corporations, academic bodies, scholarly indexes, publishers, and journals that are mainly based in the global north, and the role that they play in gatekeeping what the academic community globally does. And the influences and the impacts are very different in different parts of the world. So in our paper, we looked at specifically South Africa, and we wanted to critically interrogate, and South African colleagues, I know there are a number of South African colleagues here, will know this. In South Africa, the Department of Higher Education and Training, which is the national department that deals with higher education, has these annual lists of accredited journals which are sent to universities, and these lists basically tell us where we should be publishing if we want to benefit from this big pool of funding that is provided via a subsidy system to universities, and then academics end up benefiting from this. But what is also very important is that we have to talk about the neoliberal economic system and the neoliberal university, and the way that neoliberalism shapes what is counted as productivity in higher education. So basically, in many ways, these neoliberal productivity imperatives, the publish and perish imperatives, shape how we are supposed to approach academic publishing. Very often that turns into a game of trying to publish more in terms of quantity and not necessarily think about quality. But that's a whole other kind of aspect and topic, which in many ways impacts what universities do and what government wants universities to do. But one of the key things here is to think about the subsidies that David mentioned a moment ago, and the way that these subsidies have monetary value. So one unit, meaning one journal article authored by one person, has a significant monetary value, and part of that money goes to the university, and in many institutions, part of that money goes to the academic in terms of research funding and all that. So there's a huge incentive, but linked to the financial aspect of the incentive are these lists of academic journals where we can publish. And basically the government, through its research outputs policy, also says that only the journals that are on their lists of accredited journals, so for example, Scopus Index journals, Web of Science Index journals, and others, are considered quality platforms for publishing research output. And the money in terms of research subsidies is only given for publishing in the journals that are on the lists. So what we wanted to do in our research was to look at these lists, these large indexes and lists of academic journals, to see what is the geographic representation in terms of where these journals are located. Because as we talk about in our paper, the physical location has historical and contemporary influence on the way that these journals are controlled, maintained, in many ways, the worldviews of the people who are involved. A lot of colleagues have looked at different journals in economics and other topics, and explored the editorial boards of journals that claim to be international, and they're very much controlled by colleagues who are based in the global north. Even the journals that claim to be African journals that are based in the global north very often have a few African academics on the editorial board. So all this is very important. So when we look at the location where the journals are based, we have to think about that. So what we found, we talk about this in a lot of detail in our paper. I'll try to bring the relevance more broadly, not just in South Africa, but the relevance is there because, as we know from the book that David and colleagues have written, and other publications that look at the issues and challenges facing different African countries, from Nigeria, Ghana, and elsewhere on the continent, we do know that a lot of governments and a lot of higher education administrations want academics from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Kenya, from South Africa to publish in these international, commercially based, controlled indexes such as Web of Science and Scopus. And then when we look at the geographic representation of Web of Science, Scopus, and other large indexes, this is what we see. For example, what we found when we looked at the 2023 lists of accredited journals in South Africa, Web of Science, for example, 94% of indexed journals in Web of Science, we're talking about tens of thousands of journals, are based in the global north. Only 6% in the global south. If we think about global south is the majority world. Only 6% of journals when I talk about global south, I include China, India, the entire African continent, most Asian countries. Only 6% of journals from the entire global south are indexed in Web of Science. In the case of South Africa, they're just basically a very small number, 52 journals from the African continent, based on the African continent. There are more journals about Africa that are based in the global north, in London, in somewhere in the United States, somewhere in Canada, then African journals based in Africa. Very similar picture exists in Scopus, very similar picture in the International Bibliography of Social Sciences. Very much, I mean, basically the global north is overrepresented with very few journals from the global south and very few journals from the African continent. South Africa also has this Norwegian list of journals that is basically just the global north. There are no journals from the African continent on that list. And one of our questions in our paper was like, why is this even relevant for, if there's any progressive decolonial thinking in South African academia, then, this is not something that needs to be there because there's, other indexes to cover it. We found also that the directory of open access journals is the most globally diverse list of journals or directories of academic journals. And this directory has more journals from the global south than the global north. And this is a very important positive when you think about the global representation. But at the same time, when we zoom in and look at African journals, we see that even the directory of open access journals neglects the African continent, just like the other indexes I spoke about moments ago. David, I think you mentioned this paper. It's a very recent paper that looked at the African journals indexed in Scopus over the last 2 decades. It's been published a few weeks ago, and I was asked by University World News also to comment on this, so I had an opportunity to read it, not long ago. I wanted to just show this because in our paper, Dr. Mzileni and I looked at the, for example, we looked at Scopus in the year 2023. But what this paper does, it shows 2 decades of global trends in terms of where the journals that are indexed in Scopus, where are they based in the world. And the African continent is in green at the bottom, green or blue, I'm not quite sure here, it's very difficult to see. But you can't really see it because it is behind the Pacific region. And what this paper has shown is that in 2003, 0.9% of journals indexed in Scopus were on the African continent. In 2023, 2 decades later, the number, the percentage, 0.9%, was still the same. So while other regions see the growth, while other regions see the expansion in the Scopus, the African continent is just basically, it does not seem, I'm not saying that this is deliberate, I don't know, but there doesn't seem to be any serious attempt to work with the continent, to work with institutions on the continent, to see how do we work together to improve the scholarly publishing space and to support journals, support academic bodies and academic publishers and everything else. It doesn't seem like there's any interest in these big commercial indexes, and we have to remember that these are big businesses. They go where the money is. They go. They are driven by profits, and if they don't see that they can make profits on the African continent, they'll just ignore completely. So it's not an academic project. It's a business model that does not care about knowledge for the knowledge's sake. So we have to think about that. We have to remember that. What is the meaning of all this? What does it do to African scholarly platforms? Basically, the underrepresentation of African journals in these dominant indexes and directories is undermining, I think I have 5 minutes, I'll finish in 3. It's diminishing African scholarly platforms. They are not visible, they are not present, they are not supported, they are not valued. But also, once once our university leaders and ministers responsible for higher education, once they buy into this whole neoliberal rankings-driven thinking about higher education or knowledge production, they will tell us that we need to seek these academic platforms for knowledge publication and dissemination that are out there. And what we're going to do, we're going to ignore, the longest established platforms and journals that are based on the continent, because this is not valued by our institutions. We are not going to be able, for example, in the case of South Africa, if we publish in a journal in Zimbabwe, which is a very relevant, important journal with a lot of history, and this is where we need to publish. We cannot do that because we're not going to get the subsidies, and we need to think about subsidies, because if we don't have subsidies, we don't have research funding. So it's all interconnected. Colleagues have written also about that this way of thinking and this global hegemony, neoliberalization, the thinking about rankings, is often forcing us to choose between decolonial principles and pragmatism linked to our career, our possibilities, and our growth in our spaces and our fields of study. As I said earlier, while we do focus in our research on South Africa, we have seen and observed similar challenges linked to neoliberalization and rankings and everything else in other African countries. So David and another colleague have written about similar challenges in Nigeria, for example, and specifically neglect of local journals and the urge by higher education administrations for academics and researchers to publish internationally. And it's very interesting how, international is seen basically to be Europe and the United States. And Prof. Sabelo and Lomugacheni, for example, have written about this, how, the international or global is always assumed to be Europe and the United States. And, if it's not international, it's something that, is not. So the meaning of the international is also very important to think about, because, then that leads to neglect of whatever is meant as either local, regional, or global South, basically. What can be done? There's a very important paper, short paper by Abimbola. And what I'm going to do, I'll share this in the comments later on, the slides, and the links will take you to all these publications. Abimbola writes about this very powerful short paper, and the title is "The Knowledge About the Global South is in the Global South." And what he basically, the point that he's trying to make in that paper that is very powerful is that, we need to decide for ourselves whether we want to be considered as knowers, as the people who are contributing to the global pool of knowledge, only when we have access to the platforms and the spaces in the global north. And he says that we need to stop thinking that way, that the key for us needs to be that we need to develop our own platforms, scholarly indexes, journals, and we need to support that development on the African continent and across the global South. And we need to think about, the ways that we can collaborate together and challenge these. And it's not only about just being about the global North, but as we said before, it's about the commercial aspect, this capitalist, extractive, exploitative aspect of, knowledge being, just a product and not being there for the betterment of society and being a public good. I think we have to start thinking about an African scholarly index. David, again, you can see that I read a lot of your work, and you speak in one of your other publications with colleagues about the need for sustained support for the African Knowledge Project, and for example, the publishers like our host today. It's very difficult to do things and to expand things and plan things and make this big systemic difference on the continent without support. And very often that support is lacking. And creation of an African scholarly index requires a lot of not only financial support, but political commitment, investment, collaboration, work across the continent with different institutions. And I said, why not being led by the African Union? So I'm not going to read those questions at the bottom because I was thinking, what do we need to think about? And I think there are a lot of questions. How do we start? Who do we get to talk to us first, second, third? How do we engage? How do we go about this? But I really think that this is an absolute necessity. And there are models, Cielo model that started in Latin America and then became fairly global. In the case of the African continent, not necessarily going across the continent, but it's a very good model that we can look at to see and imagine an African scholarly index. But I think it's not just about imagining, it's about also working together to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this insightful presentation. I think I'm quite excited about the African Scholarly Index, and I hope it's something that really will change the game. But anyway, I'll leave it to the panelists to dissect these papers or these two presentations. So we're going to start off with the first panel, which will discuss the paper by Professor Mills. So we have Professor Anthony Mwafo, who's a professor of law at the National University of Lesotho, and also the editor for the African Journal of Law and Justice Systems. There is also Professor Fahod, professor in the Faculty of Medicine at the Al-Azhar University, which is a university in Egypt, and also an editor of the African Journal of Medicine. And then Dr. Khalil Babatunde, who's in the Department of Politics and International Studies at the University of Warwick in United Kingdom, also an editor for the Journal of National Building and Political Science. So colleagues, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to respond, to give your insights or comments following the presentation from Professor Mel. And then, so you have each 5 minutes, and I'll stop you once you go. So I don't know who wants to start first. Professor Moko.
Yes, thank you so much, the organizers of this webinar, and happy birthday to Adonis and Abbey. Thank you also the keynote speakers, very inciting presentations. Now I am asked to comment on the paper by Professor Mill, but let me say very quickly that as I comment on that very paper, some of my comments might also affect the paper presented by Dr. Heleta, because these two papers are related. Of course, they speak to the same subject matter. Now, my first speech on the presentation by Dr. Mill is based on his observation that as recent as 1963, no African citation appears on the Science Citation Index. And the reason is why? Is it like Africans are not publishing, or is it because they've not published in Africa? I went back to the history to find out, when did we even start publishing in Africa? And when did the Europeans start publishing? I found from a casual search on Google that the first journal in Europe was published in 1665. The first one in Africa was published in 1901. Yet the first professor from Africa, who by historical accident eventually obtained this professorship in Germany, schooled in Germany and obtained this professorship in Germany, is a Ghanaian. And his name is Professor Anton William Amo. Schooled in Germany, became a professor. He lived in the 18th century between 1703 and 1759. And I asked myself, where was he publishing throughout his period? And the answer is obvious. He published in the European journals, not in any African journals, because as of the time he lived in the 18th century, there were no journals in Africa. Why is it so? Africans tend to embrace Europe and they tend to neglect Africa. Coming down to the contemporary times in our respective institutions of higher learning, this same idea still obtains, where you find that in the African universities, when a staff member, an academic staff applies for promotion or even for employment, is required to show that certain percentage of his publications are in the international journals. And as Dr. Heleta has rightly observed, international journals in the African universities context is actually European or American journals, not African journals. Because ordinarily, one would have thought that if you publish in a journal outside your own country, it is international, but not so for the African universities. They still prefer those from Europe than those in Africa. Again, this issue trickles down to our students. Look at our students at the postgraduate level who research in the areas of humanities and law. Very often, the recommendations and conclusions they arrive at is always that Africa should adopt this from Europe, adopt that from Europe. Why not look at our own peculiarities and try that and make such recommendations in such a way that we embrace our peculiarities and talk less of Europe? Well, I was also happy with the presentation where Professor Mill had mentioned issues relating to African Transformative Research Charter 2023. And I asked myself, how would that be implemented in Africa to ensure that we increase our publications, to ensure that we increase the journals where we publish? I'm just wondering where the African universities will classify Adonis and Abbey's journals. Since most of them are tagged African, fine. They might eventually classify them as non-international because they are Africans. But good enough for Adonis and Abbey. They have one foot in Europe and one foot in Africa. Their office there is there in the UK and is also there in Nigeria. So either way, they will fit in. And that is a big plus for them. Then the other issue, which was mentioned by Professor Mill, is the three global academic publishing economies. The three global academic publishing economies, which very often influence the indexing of a particular journal by the indexing bodies. And that's output economy, data economy, and credibility economy. I would like to speak very briefly on output economy and credibility economy. Output economy relates to productivity. In fact, Prof has
I think I would have to stop you because we really are running out of time. Can you wrap up maybe in
okay, let me round up very quickly. 10 seconds.
10 seconds.
Output economy and credibility economy are competing very seriously. What should we pursue? Is it to produce more, or is it the credibility of what we produce? So how do we harmonize these two positions in Africa to ensure that when we publish, it's not just the quantity of our publications, but also the credibility of what we publish, as well as the credibility of the journal where we publish. And this has to do with the way the journals are set up, the editorial board, how the papers are submitted, how they are reviewed, and how they are published. This goes against the output economy, which just looks at the number of papers that are published each year without looking at the intellectual quality of such papers. These are some of the things we must address very quickly to ensure that what we require in Africa, that we eventually get there. And that is to have publishing platforms where we can publish and which are credible and acceptable to our institutions. I'm very sorry, for want of time, I cannot go further than this. Thank you.
I'll have to cut you short. I know we could go on, but our time is so limited. Professor Verhout, over to you, your take. Please, 5 minutes. I would definitely stop you after 5 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's very nice to meet you and my colleague in this wonderful event and to celebrate the 22 years anniversary of Adonis and Abbey. I'm glad to be with you. My name is Hisham Farhood, and I am the former Dean of Faculty of Medicine in Cairo, in Egypt, Al Azhar University. And I am now I'm orthopedic surgeon, and I am the chief editor in African Journal of Medicine. I would like to thank our guest speaker, Professor David Miles and Savo Helta, for their fantastic presentations. What I wanted to concentrate on my question to them is about the solutions for the challenges that we are facing. And instead of analyzing the problems, so maybe we'll jump for the solutions. And from the place which I am coming from, I found always some problems for the young researchers to publish their own activities and work. So maybe we need to do something to attract more researchers. Maybe we need to do something to help the young researchers. Maybe we need to do something to sort out the problem regarding the financial issue that it's facing those researchers. And maybe also we need to do something for facilitate their the way they are publishing is sometimes complicated for them. So we need always also to find solutions for those who are not familiar with publication until they become able to find out their way and to be more creative. Also, there is a lot of challenges regarding the financial issues and the governmental help, maybe, and also the worldwide difficulties in publishing the papers and work. Maybe we can let our colleague and our guest speaker to answer about this, and I think this is enough for me. And thank you very much for your kind understanding my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you for that. I think our presenter will respond to that. But I want to move on to Dr. Khalil Babatunde to give us your insights, and then we will go back to Professor Mills to respond to panelists.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Professor Mills for his very kind presentation, and happy birthday to Adonis and Abbey. I think I want to jump in on the conceptualization of change, because the theme of this session is about the challenges and the opportunities of scholarly publishing in Africa. And while it's very easy to see the challenges, and often those challenges being situated within very big and wider contexts of systemic and structural political economic factors, often the challenges overwhelm our ability to conceptualize change. So I'm kind of sitting on the research approach and methodology of a lot of Professor Mills' work, which is a very impactful combination of a kind of historical analysis of academic publishing, both internationally and specifically in relation to the African context, combined with interviews from academics themselves. So his recent book on Who Counts in in academic publishing in Ghana, for example, and some of his other work that includes interviews of academics. And that really, for me, sits within the framework of an everyday international political economy approach to understanding how academics and academic publishers sit within the global political economy. Because our lives are bound by the fate of the international economy, whether it's the world markets or the tides and crises of global capitalism, right? And so the publishing companies are situated within this wider economic space, and different aspects of the presentations from both scholars have shown that the economic factors are very significant for shaping the way that academic publishing works and the motivations and the drivers of where academics publish and how they publish. And a lot of those things are very much situated between the relationship of wealth and power, and how through the lens of coloniality, which I know speaks more to Dr. Helita's work, but the lens of coloniality enables us to see how this value that is assigned to knowledge production, as well as economic factors that creates a very clear pattern of hierarchy between the global North and the global South, also affect the way that academics publish, where they publish, and all of those things are interconnected. So specifically, an everyday political economy approach allows us to understand the interests as well as the conceptualization of change from everyday actors and people or practices or places that we wouldn't normally think about. And that's where Professor Mill's concept of defiance and looking at academic publishing in Africa as a form of defiance is really such a powerful starting point for some of the changes that we are hoping to see in this sector. And so when we think of defiance as actually a type of change, right? It's not just a positioning, it's actually a starting point for more structural or systemic change, which we then need to put into practical action through the choices that academics are able to make, how through collective action, academics in the global South can pull together their voices to lobby, say, universities and governments in how they fund and how they structure even the incentives of their career progression around where they publish and what journals they should publish from. It could also inspire some of the more innovative ways that we finance publishing within the continent, within the global South more broadly. So this idea of defiance becomes that momentum that leads to more practical, pragmatic changes within academic spaces in the global South, to take advantage of frameworks like the Afro-structuring that Professor Mills highlighted in the work of scholars. How do we design and drive financing innovations, collective action to ensure that the motivations, the progression of academics within the global South is reflected in the power dynamics of their universities, of their governments, both at local, national, and regional levels. So someone mentioned the African Union, for example. So for me, this idea of change and linking these notions of change to practical action, to practical collective action, that is concentrated within the global South, I think is where some of the real change and opportunities can sit. So that's my, I want to end on an optimistic note that there is scope for change and opportunity for pushing back on these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Babatunde, for this. I think I will, in the interest of time, I will move on to the second set of panelists who will respond to Dr. Heleta's paper or presentation. So we have Professor Zuba, who's a professor in the Department of Communications at the University of South Africa, and also editor of the Journal of African Films, in Diaspora Studies. There's also Professor Manyele, who's professor in chemical and process engineering at the University of Dar es Salaam, and also editor of the African Journal of Advances in Engineering and Technology. Then we have Dr. Jubudo, who's an academic in the Department of History, Nigerian African University, and also editor of the Journal of African History, Archaeology and Tourism. So I'll hand over to you, colleagues, and you each have 5 minutes. If you can wrap it up in less than 5 minutes, that would be great, because we are really running out of time. And just for our panelists, our keynote speakers, to also take note of the questions that are popping up in the chat. I will highlight to some of them, which speak to the financial aspect of publishing and its impact on what we publish in Africa. So there are quite a number of questions there, but I will come to those ones later on. But hand over to the panelists for that. So Professor Zimba, you first, and then.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start by also echoing happy birthday to Adonis and Abby, and that both speakers, Dr. Heleta, Dr. Mills, mentioned crucial issues about us as Africans and publishing in Africa. Just to pick from the two last slides from Dr. Heleta's presentation that mentioned very important aspects that I picked, which ended up with questions to publishers in Africa, like Adonis and Abby. The African Scholarly Index, I think, is very important that Dr. Heleta mentioned there. It is through the partnerships and working together of publishers in Africa that Adonis and Abby should maybe in future to put up a summit for all publishers. Like any other partnerships, last week I was attending a partnership of researchers on research and ethics network in Africa. So that all these questions that both speakers mentioned on where do we go from here and what to do, as one voice of publishers can convince African governments. The mention of African Union to host African Scholarly Index, yes, but if publishers are going to their governments individually as separate voices, I think it will take us time to reach there. So very important, if we can have that partnership of publishers. I'm putting this to Adonis and Abby to make sure that they reach to all publishers in Africa so that they can talk as one voice. Then all these that are questions that are colonial then will be answered, and it will be a beginning for us to start answering such kind of questions that the second slide on Dr. Heleta's presentation mentioned. Thanks very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Doc, for being brief. And I think we'll move on to Professor Manyele. I'm not sure if Prof. Manyele is in the room. Maybe in the interest of time, Dr. Jungude, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
All right, all right. Good afternoon, and happy birthday to Adonis and the Abbey Publishing. My discussion will be based on the what is next after receiving presentations from the experts. My discussion will cover just 4 issues, and one of the issues is how to mobilize the policymakers to prioritize the African scholarly infrastructure. As we can see, most of the challenges are anchored to the national priorities in the African countries, which then calls for attention of the governance in the countries. My second point is on the use of the regional bodies like the SADC, ECOWAS, and the AU, if they could actually play their role in terms of funding and the development, but also collaborative platforms for African publishers, as well as African scholars to come up with new well-established systems for publishing, especially for the African scholars. We are looking at the engineering and technology, for example, which is actually faring very low in terms of indexed publishing infrastructure. I also note the fact that we need to train and empower the scholars to manage local journals, which are now actually mushrooming. The only thing that is missing in how the journals are managed. But also there is a challenge which is facing most of the journals, and this is the quality of the peer review. Not only the quality, but also timing of the review reports, and also how to promote open access. This is one of the big challenges. I was one of the given the suggestion to the Adonis and the Abbey, the organizers of the webinar, if the outcomes of this conference could be used to form something like a poster that can be presented to the AU, ECOWAS, or SADC meetings for policy dialogue. But also the poster could be used by the universities, especially to raise awareness among the scholars during the research weeks, which are actually being organized in most of the universities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Jungudo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Mariam Mohamed Jungudo from the Nigerian Army University U, the editor-in-chief, Journal of African History, Archaeology, and Tourism. First of all, I wish to congratulate and wish Adonis and Abbey a happy birthday. Adonis and Abbey is one of the reputable journals in both Africa and Europe, and they have been doing well. Congratulations, and I'm wishing you more years to come. A lot have been said about the challenges. For example, both speakers, Dr. Neil and Dr. Heleta, have spoken about the challenges of with academic population, the challenges that is posed on the publishers, academics, and the field in regarding to population. I would like to take on Dr. Heleta's question on what can be done to challenge bibliometric coloniality. In this, first of all, we all know that the bibliometric coloniality is how dominant Western-centric metric index system and publishing structure marginalize knowledge production from the global south. That is, they are marginalizing most of they dominate the population, the citation of journals in the whole world, thereby making Africans to look at and be marginalized and what have you. So the question he posed here that what can be done to challenge bibliometric coloniality? I think the first thing we need to do is to rethink bibliometric metrics. We should think of alternative metric system. For example, and metrics, citation analysis within regional journals, e.g. Adonis and Abbey. Adonis and Abbey publishing company could be also regarded as one of the metrics. This is bibliometric metrics in the world. And also, we need to encourage academics to cite and engage with African and global South scholarship more actively, and thereby countering the dominance of Western citation. And also, we need to also build and strengthen African Global South knowledge platform. For example, universities and research institutions will invest in locally controlled, peer-reviewed journals that are open access and visible globally, e.g. Adonis and Abbey. Another example of how we can challenge or we can tackle bibliometric coloniality is by the role of our governments. For example, government, universities, and philanthropists should provide funding for African-led journals to ensure sustainability and prevent dependence on high article processing charges journals. Also, encourage South-South collaboration between researchers, universities, and publishers across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Another way that we can challenge bibliometric coloniality is by offering or training, organizing training on journal management, peer review processes, like one of the panelists spoke about, talk about this, that there is need to organize training on journal management by Adonis and Abbey. There also need to organize peer review processes and indexing requirements to ensure quality and sustainability. Another way that we can challenge this bibliometric coloniality is to encourage the use of DOI, outsheets, integration, and so on and so forth. By this, I think Africans will challenge this bibliometric coloniality to a large extent. Similarly, there is need to engage organizations like Google Scholar, Crossref, to ensure equitable inclusion of African journal in global database. For example, already Adonis and Abbey has been there, and it will continue to prosper. So, use of social medias can also boost or promote African scholarship beyond academic cycle. There is need for the whole world or the policymakers to know that the need of African population or academic cycle need to go beyond that for them to know that there is need to recognize African journal citations. It shouldn't be always European citation that matters in promotion. African journals should also take a greater role in promotion exercise, in citation, as far population is concerned. So with this, I think with a lot of more points, we can challenge diplomatic coloniality in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc. And I think there's a lot of exciting conversation also taking place in the chat room. And the challenge maybe to Adonis and is to host this summit or conference so that we can pursue this conversation further. I think the time that we have is so limited, but there's a lot that we can delve in and also strategize and make a way forward. But I do wish you a happy birthday and more wonderful years of success. I think as a journal, as a publisher, you've done well. And against all odds, you have done very well. So congratulations on that. I think I will hand over to Ms. Adibet for the Q&A, which I'm assuming that if questions coming from those that are there physically. Maybe while we wait for that to happen and connect, some of the questions that are in the chat is maybe the two panelists can respond, is how we can bring all stakeholders, academia and administrators together to all reorient our mindsets on this whole debate that we're talking about. Another interesting one is on the financial aspects of the journal, of journals in general. I see Prof had already responded to that, so I was typing something the last time I checked. Maybe you, both of you may want to respond to some of these questions just briefly before I head over to Ms. Adipi.
Thank you very much for seeing that. And thank you everyone for taking the time to offer these great comments. I really appreciate your careful reflections, and everyone on the chat. There's some excellent questions here. I'm trying to respond to some of them as I go, but it just shows there's so much interest in this topic, and that we need to keep thinking hard about the challenges and to asking these questions. I would love to be able to respond in detail, and really all I can say at this point is that I think the history is important, as Prof. Hussein pointed out. We need to understand why and how we're in this situation now. The political economy is really important to make sense of. It's an everyday challenge for editors to work out how to fund their journals. Is their time allowed for? Are they able to reward peer reviewers? Is there any income for the editorial office? Is there university supporting them with time? These are really practical, important questions, and many journals survive on a shoestring. So I think we have to keep asking these questions, and this is why the comments about policy are absolutely right. We need our universities to take this more seriously, to create policies that support their journals. We need our governments to do the same, and probably therefore we need the African Union and organizations like Curtis Ria to be much more outspoken about the need for African journal infrastructures. So yes, I agree with all of these challenges. I haven't got the easy answers, but thank you all for the questions.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that. I'm not sure whether Dr. Aditi, you want to respond as well?
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been looking at the Q&A section, and there's a lot of engagement. I'll try to respond specifically where I can. But thank you everybody for coming in, bringing in new perspectives and commenting. Thank you very much for all that. There are no easy solutions. If there are easy solutions to anything, we wouldn't necessarily have to kind of think critically and deeply on all these things. I think for me, what is very important is that we find a way to frame the problem. And I mean, David, thank you so much to you and the colleagues for helping us, my colleague Pedro Mussolini and I, to give us a way to frame the problem that we've been seeing, for example, in South African higher education. But and one of the things that we've been engaging on in South African case was that we've been asking our colleagues. We've been all getting these lists for a decade, and we only now, and this is in 2024, are starting to ask these critical questions. It's a systemic problem. And even we kind of felt bad that we also didn't do it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in the beginning. But it is what it is. Sometimes you need that frame, that critical frame, that the concept such as bibliometric coloniality allows us to really start to see things in a systemic and structural way and ask critical questions. And I really liked one of the comments from one of the colleagues saying that there's a need for academic publishers in Africa to continue to engage, perhaps come together, but not only academic publishers, also the scholars and academics, people who are working, who are asking similar critical questions, university leaders, possibly finding ways to bring in policymakers in higher education across the African continent. I'm not sure whether they are aware of the problems. Perhaps we have to keep pushing and also take our ideas beyond our academic publications and get to the policymakers and create, these possibilities and opportunities where we can continue to ask these questions and hopefully create a platform. There is no easy way. There is no recipe that can, get us there in a day or two, in a year. But I just wanted to say, as my last point, that academic publishers are very important. I forgot to say happy, anniversary to our host, but your work is very important, and I hope that you can work with other publishers, and you know them perhaps better than we do, because you're in the same space and industry, face similar challenges. And you speaking about your successes and your challenges, perhaps together, is very important, and reaching to the policymakers and others to hear you and to find a way to work with you to bring about systemic and structural changes. It's not about one journal, one publisher, one academic, one university. It's a systemic and structural problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And I think there is a lot of work that we need to do. And Adonis Abbey, we are here to help you take the dialogue further in support of this initiative. I think I want to hand over to Ms. Adibe so that we get questions from those that are physically present, because we don't see their comments in the chat, and we only have 15 minutes for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fuesina. Thank you very much. Please, let's appreciate all the panelists. A warm applause to them. You would agree with me that this webinar has been quite insightful. We have lots of questions already. We won't be able to take all of them, but I'm sure we'll be able to touch some. And perhaps right here present, we might take a few more questions. So I hope the panelists can hear me as I read out some of the questions that have been posted here. Okay, so the first question is from Dr. Clara Ijoma Osuji. She says, thank you. I'd like to raise a question regarding the financial barriers in academic publishing, particularly for authors from the global south, such as Nigeria. Given the significant impact of exchange rates and the rising costs associated with publishing, often tied to currencies like the dollar or pound, how can we address the disparity that prevents high quality research from being disseminated? Okay, perhaps I should take more questions. Another question from Dr. Clara Ijoma Osoji as well. For instance, many researchers may produce valuable knowledge but find themselves unable to publish due to prohibitive fees. This raises critical questions. How can we create more equitable funding models or institutional support that enables researchers from lower income countries to publish their work without facing financial strain? I think I'll take the last one from her, which reads, what role should academic publishers play in addressing these disparities to ensure that the quality of research, rather than the financial capacity of the author, dictates publication opportunities? I'll take it. Our moderator would give those questions to the different panelists.
Yes.
Dr. Fuesina, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. I can hear you. Can you hear me? We can hear you. I think the panelists, it's open. The questions are open to you. Anyone wants to take this one? The three questions or one of them?
Thank you very much, Faustina, and also to Dr. Clara Suji. As I said, the questions of creating more equitable funding model is a great question. And there's a lot of work happening at the moment to think about models of publishing that are community owned. One example is diamond open access publishing, where institutions support their journals, where you don't charge very expensive publication charges, and or you create models where universities subscribe to open so that the journals remain open, and yet they're still subscribed to by universities, libraries, especially rich libraries in the north. So there's a lot of thinking about how to change the model that currently exists in publishing. And there are lots of experiments happening to try and make these models more equitable, but it really depends on the history of particular journals and their funding model. It's quite hard to change your model overnight, and subscriptions are hard won, and so suddenly to change your model from a subscription model to a different model, like a author pays model, is tricky. I certainly know that South Africa this year is the host of the G20, and there have been discussions about models of open science that are more equitable, and diamond open access is one of those discussions happening. Whether South Africa has enough influence within the G20 to get that conversation taken seriously, but certainly there's hopeful signs. I think people are recognizing that this model is broken, and it's not just us recognizing that. Across the world, people are saying the commercial publishing model, when I say commercial, the large scale commercial publishing model, seems to be in real trouble. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Hilita.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I knew we will get to a point where we're going to ask the questions around the high cost of publishing, and you know what happens to people, to institutions, to countries that cannot afford, like others, you know, transformative agreements and everything else. And I think that is the key problem. I've been looking at the issues, you know, surrounding transformative agreements. For example, Southern Africa has the you know, the Sunlick model, and you know, transformative agreements help academics to publish in hybrid journals without having to pay and all that. But you know, looking at that in a bit more detail, and realizing that you know, countries like South Africa can spend a lot of money on these transformative agreements. You know, that's one side of the story, and the other side of the story is that you know, many countries on the continent, for example, do not have funds to invest in these transformative agreements. And what that does is it continues to maintain these inequalities, you know, whether they are global, regional, sometimes even national inequalities. And we have to do something as the global academic community in terms of challenging and changing the ways that academic publishing is being done. It seems to me that the global academic community, for whatever reason, has given up on being in control of the global knowledge project, meaning the publishing, whether it is books or journals or whatever it is. As I said in my talk earlier, I mean, we really are, what we do and how we do it and how much money we need to spend on being able to publish is dictated to us by these huge corporations. And, you know, knowledge is a product. You know, if somebody, there was a comment earlier about, you know, what happens to quality research that cannot be published because the authors, perhaps, or the institutions where they're based do not have funding to pay for article processing charges or whatever it is. Yeah, we're losing a lot. We're losing a lot in terms of, you know, what is being done. What are we going to do about it? What can we do about it in this, you know, very unequal world that is, you know, becoming worse by the day, more commodified, commercialized, and everything else. We have to keep challenging things and doing research, engaging with this, and then doing the work. And honestly, I really I said it early in my talk, but I like Abimbola's challenge to all of us to think about, not only about us getting a very small seat at the table in the, with the big publishers in the global north, but to develop, an African scholarly index. And, there's a lot of work, a lot of investment, a lot of political will that needs to go into that. It's probably going to take a decade or so, but it needs to be started at some point, and the work needs to happen, and start small and build and look at similar models that already exist, like Cielo, and we need to. There are no excuses, and others are not going to do it for us. So we need to put in the work.
Thank you, Doc. Professor Nwafao, I'll just give you less than a minute to respond. I think we have more questions, so it's less than a minute. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, moderator. Yes, I'm happy that this question is coming from Professor Osuji from Nigeria. And Nigeria has so much to learn from South Africa in terms of research funding. And the academics in the university just need to speak up. You don't have to keep quiet about these things. Universities are not set up just to pay salaries. They have to encourage research. And research is one of the key elements of the university's existence. So they need to talk. Let them put in their budgets the amount they have to use to fund research each year. There is no doubt that considering the amount of salary paid to the staff members, it's going to be quite difficult for them to fund some of these publications in the international journals. They need some assistance from the universities. And it's only the academic staff members that must make this happen. You people over there must speak. Talk to these institutions. It's so unfortunate that we have every year, you see that in spite of the number of universities in Nigeria, in spite of the number of academics in Nigeria, South Africa continues to record far more research outputs in accredited journals than Nigerian academics. Why must it continue to be like that? And that's why most of the universities in South Africa are ranked better than the Nigerian universities. So, Prof. Osuji and your colleagues, people must talk. Tell the government what you want. And of course, I know there's debt fund that provides minimal funding and other NGOs that can also assist, but there must be some amount in the budget for research funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Just to add on to that, I think South Africa is kind of moving towards that. University of KwaZulu-Natal actually do fund more publishing, which is done within Africa. So I think there is already some buy-in from universities, and we'll see more movement towards that. But back to you, Ms. Adibwe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Permit me to just interject a little on the issue of funding. It is true that South African universities dominate, and that's because every year South African government publishes a list of accredited journals. And if for each publication, if you are able to publish in each of those journals, both the researcher and the institution get some funding. In Nigeria, Covenant University does that, because I know in our own journals that are Scopus indexed, even though it's charged in pounds, once you pass through the review process, Covenant University pays. So in one way, some of them are picking up. What do we do as a publishing company, to address the issue of lack of funds by academics? What we do is that we adopt what they call mixed model. There are some of our journals, of the 27 we currently publish, only 13 charge publication fees. And even when they charge the publication fees, if you're paying from your pocket, we give you 50% discount. And there are some of our journals that are high profile that we don't even charge publication. If I give you an example, one of our journals called Journal of Somali Studies, it covers the entire Horn of Africa and fragile states. It's Scopus indexed. It is a Q2 journal, which means it's relatively well ranked. We don't charge, and that's deliberate. So why do we have to charge at all? It's because, as others have mentioned, bigger publishers from the global north, they have the cloud. And Taylor and Francis alone publishes 2,500 journals, which means if it only makes £200 for each journal, and leveraging on technology to use smaller number of staff, it can survive. We publish only 27, maybe 37 by June. So it's difficult for us to say we are going to do only traditional publishing and not charging. In any case, even the big publishers like Taylor and Francis, they are very active in open publishing. We have an article, publishing one article may cost you up to $500. So that's one way. Even one of the reasons why I say that the issue of funding alone, it's not enough, is that in many African institutions, even for you to publish in departmental journal, you still pay. And these days, where about 4 or 5 authors can come together to publish, and smaller publishers like us offering them 50% discount, when you split it across the board, you find out that it's even cheaper than what you pay to publish in your departmental journals. The challenges are there, as I said, but some publishers also are trying to recognize some of those challenges by offering, like 50% discounts. One of the challenges that has not been reflected is also challenge of branding. If Taylor and Francis comes to you, sometimes they ask you go and bring a reviewer. Our journal editors will tell you that even our own editors cannot influence, because we have structured a different review process, knowing that we are not that brand. An editor cannot influence which paper is going to be published. Contrary to what is normally done, we have a 3-stage review process. You have to pass the academic review process. Then you go to the language test. If the language, we do sample language, if it's not up to date, we fail you. We reject the paper. And after that, then you go to the plagiarism. Our threshold is 15%. If you don't make it, the paper is rejected. So unlike in conventional, journals by the big press with bigger names, if you pass the academic review stage, you're almost home and dry. For us, it's only one step. You still have 2 steps to clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Okay, I'll take some more questions now. This is from Ali Al-Blal from Morocco. Yeah, okay, Ali Al-Blal from Morocco University, Faculty of Letters and Humanities, Ibn Zor Agadir. It is a pleasure to attend this priceless event pertaining to publishing issues in Africa. Don't you think that African journals do require a novel policy to better run their academic affairs? Let me read that. Pertaining to issues in Africa, don't you think that African journals do require a novel policy to better run their academic affairs? I'll take another one again. This is from John Alabi. I am John Alabi, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Corporate Strategy, Prince Abubakar Audu University, Anyigba, Nigeria. Great webinar. How can we bring all stakeholders, academia and administrator together to reorient mindsets on international only in the context Europe and America? Happy birthday, Adonis Abbey, and thanks to all speakers. We'll add one more question to that. This is Grenius Alfred Mavondo. Grenius Alfred Mavondo. Publishing in Africa definitely has a colonial hegemony surrounding it and suffocating whatever enthusiasm that may be rising in Africa. In Zimbabwe, there has been policy directive to direct 1% of the GDP directed to research and publications. This, however, has remained a policy directive with no movement towards implementation. 1% of GDP is a very large amount that will be able to drive publication of research and research itself in the country. My question is, how can this political will to drive research and publication into reality that can have a push and pull factor on the publication in Africa? I'll take where his question began. So my question is, how can this political will to drive research and publication into a reality that can have a push and pull factor on the publication in Africa? So that's 3 questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Marianne, you can take the floor.
As for the question that has to do with colonial hegemony surrounding African publication, I would like to comment that, yeah, you are absolutely right. The legacy of colonial hegemony in Africa continues to shape many aspects of its development, including academia, publishing, governance, and economic system. This influence often manifests as structural dependencies on Western models, funding, and validation, which can stifle local innovation and autonomy. In scholarly population, for example, African researchers often struggle with visibility because dominant academic indexes and high-impact journals are controlled by Western institutions. Similarly, policy frameworks and economic systems are still influenced by colonial era structures that prioritize extraction over local industrialization and innovations. However, there is also a growing push for Afrocentric model of knowledge production, governance, and economic interdependence or independence. Movement like Afrostructuring, like Dr. Mills mentioned in his presentation, that we need to look at, or we need to publish in line with African methodologies, structures, and what have you in the academia. These efforts tend to create indigenous research indices and advocacy for local industrialization, all signal a rising consciousness aimed at breaking this cycle. The challenge is sustaining this momentum against extreme system. Therefore, we have a long way in order to look at all these things and address them according to the African method or African vision. Like I said, Adonis and Abbey have been doing this, and I'm sure that they will continue to do this in the future as far as population is concerned in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Judubo. The other panelists, anyone wants to respond? I think we are really running out of time, and we are over our time limit. Yes, Anthony?
Okay, I think we can take maybe 2 more questions. There's a question from Dakwon Dang. It reads, I am Dr. Dakwon Dang from Annan University, Kwale, in Nigeria. Can I get a specific contact? Okay, I think this is to Adonis and Abbey. We don't need to put this up there. Okay, there's a question from Hannah Tarindwa. She says, hello all. I'm Hannah Tarindwa from Zimbabwe, but studying at Daystar, Kenya. I am very happy and sad to hear this conversation occurring in 2025. I am also wondering how long discussions will be before the new journals are available and attitude towards African research as being inferior will change. I hope to contribute to this change. There's another question as well. Let's see if we can get this. Ike Bunam. Peter Chireke. I think the spelling is wrong. I am a communication scholar. I didn't see any journal that covers our area in the list of the 37 journals here. Where do we publish? I think this is for Professor Adibe.
Hello, if you go to Journal of African Films and Diaspora Studies and read about the scope, it covers communication of all journals.
Thank you very much. Okay.
We've got David here.
More question from Umar Musa. What is the criteria for differentiating publication fees? Umar Inoa from Nile University of Nigeria. What is the criteria for differentiating publication fees?
I don't know if it's meant for me, but as I said, we have 27 journals. That's, some of them published since 2004. Only 13 charge publication fees. If you look at the Journal of Nation Building and Policy Studies, we just feel, nation building is so critical in many African countries. We want to, beef up conversation in that field. So at a point, we were charging publication fees in the journal. Then we said, no, we don't want to charge publication fees. So there is really, we just look at the situation of the journal, the flow of journals, how important we feel, and then how many requests we get about that journal. It's also about positioning to increase the citations from each journal. Because in the final analysis, it's not just about the journals, you want to increase the journal's impact.
Thank you, Prof. Okay, so we'll take these two questions back to the panelists. The first one I read was from Dag Bondang, and then I'll add one more from Golda Ekenedo. I am really glad to be a part of this interesting webinar. I want to particularly thank Adonis and Abbey for this landmark endeavor. I am very much concerned with the role of institutions of higher learning in Africa regarding academic publishing, especially for promotion. The insistence that academics must publish a huge percentage of their works in foreign journals is a setback for African publishers. I want to suggest that the criteria should include that academics must have a certain percentage of their publications in indexed Africa journals. Thank you. So that was from Golda Ekenedo, and perhaps I should read again that other question I read earlier. Just a moment, please. Okay, Dag Wondang. I am Dr. Dag Wondang from Annan University, Kwale, probably Kwale, in Nigeria. Can I get a specific contact? Okay, we've done that one. Sorry about that. Pardon me. Okay, that question and this from Hannah Tarindwa from Zimbabwe. I am very happy and sad to hear this conversation occurring in 2025. I am also wondering how long discussions will be before the new journals are available and attitude towards African research as being inferior will change. I hope to contribute to this change. So those two questions, please. Those are two last questions we're taking.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mills, Prof. Mills.
Thank you very much, Christina and Adonis Abbey. So these things are linked, and as Professor Adibe said, a lot of this is about reputation and about how we perceive certain journals and brands as being more reputable. And so what we really need, I think, or many African scholars and universities need to recognize is that you shouldn't let reputation be defined by these indexes that aren't including African journals. And so if you actually said, okay, you must publish, as many Chinese universities do. If you're a scholar in a Chinese university, you have to publish in local journals and internationally. The same could be done by many African universities. So some of this is about changing the incentives, changing the ways that African universities evaluate their staff. That would really change things. And there is so much happening in terms of new journals being launched, and there's a lot of exciting new research happening. We just need to recognize that diversity rather than going back again to the same narrow indexes with their Eurocentrism. So thank you. And this is all about changing our attitudes, changing our views of what counts as quality.
Thank you, David. Professor Tizumba.
Thanks very much. I think it has been echoed. The issue of a question of promotions, it also has to do with index and citations, because universities want to use those promotions as part of their rankings, and promotions should also contribute on the international funding grants or donors to the university. That portfolio is well needed by universities. So it is from us, as both our guest speakers mentioned on their presentations, that we promote ourselves in terms of collaborations so that we talk as one voice in Africa. Dr. Mills mentioned that platforms like G20 coming to our shores, BRICS, and all those political formations, we need to put our voices as academics and researchers, but not individual or separate, as one voice. So it's up to us. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Aaron. Anthony, Prof. Nafwa.
Yes, thank you so much. There was a question that was raised earlier from somebody from Morocco. Yeah, and it wasn't answered, about structuring academic journals in the institutions. And I think I should say one or two things about that so that he will be happy when he leaves here. You see, one of the problems we have about the academic journals in the institutions of higher learning is that most times they are structured around one person or a few individuals. See, some people that have this desire to publish, they come together and they set up the journal. The journal is not properly integrated into the faculty system. And whenever journal is structured in that manner, it's floating. Once the person who set it up or the few individuals that set up the journal leave the institution, the journal hibernates until such a time as some other person comes up again as interested in the journal, it comes up again. So when journals are being set up in the faculty or in the department or in the university, they must be structured in such a way that the journal is not personalized. And such a thing also goes to the credibility of the journal, because when journal is just around one individual, the person determines what is to be published and what is not to be published. So when journal is structured in such a way that is detached from the individual, it shows it maintains some level of sustainability, ensures that there's proper succession to the members of the editorial board, because academics come and go and journal must remain. So these are the things that must be looked into whenever a faculty is about to set up a journal. Set it up in such a way that it is not attached to a particular individual, not even to the editorial board. Those people there are just like the deans and heads of departments that will come and go, and the journal must remain. But once you structure it around one individual, the journal hibernates once the individual leaves. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I think we hand over back to Adonis Abbey to take us further to the program.
Questions just within a short period from the guests present here. So perhaps we have questions. I'll be passing the mic. Does anyone have questions as regards the webinar today? Yes, sir.
Sorry, I came late. My name is Professor Mark Ike, former Minister of Education, Nigeria. I'm just wondering if this body could rise up and the Minister of Education. And well, the present minister has just come back from the US and should be able to appreciate what we're talking about in terms of knowledge production and knowledge distribution. When I was in the US as a professor, US academics used to pride themselves that the US is the most productive in terms of knowledge in the world. I don't think they have changed. And so the present Minister of Education is a product of that geo-intellectual space and should be able to appreciate what we are talking about in terms of decolonizing knowledge. Several years ago, the Troika, of which I was one, wrote a book called Decolonization of African Literature. And some people thought we were being Tarzanist or romantic. I'm referring to Wole Soyinka, who didn't quite like what we said. But the problem persists, and that's what we're talking about. Colonization of knowledge. 6% of journals in the world are to be found in Asia, Africa, and so on and so forth. That's not good enough. And we should be able to rise up and say that African knowledge matters. I remember somebody saying that publishing started in Africa, in Egypt, not in Europe. And a certain Egyptian king or monarch said he didn't like publications because they make truth or lies permanent. That was, so, that's part of the problem we have. It hasn't stopped. Yesterday, our National Assembly made lies permanent. I don't know where you're coming from. Yeah, that's my view. Thank you very much.
That was in 79, between 79 and 83, so you can count the number of years. And he was also a author of a very important book we read in graduate called Towards the Decolonization of African Literature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It's an honor having you here. I think we have another question.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank Adonis and Abbey for this, first on their birthday, and then for this initiative. I need to be correct because this should be the first of its kind in Africa where we are gathering to discuss it. So, Prof, you and your team, Professor Dibe, congratulations and thanks for this groundbreaking event. I am Chinedu Ude from the National Defense College. Why do we have problems of the challenges of publications, academic scholarly publications in Africa? So I would like to raise a few things. What do we publish? Do they really matter in the society? Do they have value? Compared to the global north, when they publish, or even the Asia, China, when people publish in China, their publications aid, there's a relationship between the academia, the gowns and the industry, the gown and the town, or if you like, the gown and the industry. But in our own case in Africa, most times, particularly in Nigeria, we are publishing just to get titles, and then put so many things in our names. I think we need to begin to look at that and say, are we publishing for the sake of publishing, or we are publishing to solve our security and development challenges that actually confront us? The second issue I would like to raise is the issue of fraud, scam publications, fraudulent publications in Africa. We need to also have conversations around that. There is a lot of scam, a lot of predatory journals, that are churned out every time. Most times, a publication here today, with all due respect to most, is about how much you pay, you get published. Most universities. I'm pleased to say that, Prof, I published in the Journal of Nation Building under Dr. Khalid Babatunde. I never paid a dime to have my paper published in that journal. But I mean, it's a reputable journal, and I never paid a dime. The other point I would like to raise is also that for Africa to really what it calls scholarly publication, we need to scale up our peer review processes. Yeah, peer review processes. Most of these journals are published in a hurry. Not Adonis Abbey. Yeah, I must make that difference. Because when I submitted my article, they went through a couple of peer reviews before it was actually accepted. I think most of the journals, one man can decide to publish. I tried to publish in a country, I won't mention the country's name here. I went through several editions of editing with about 3 peer reviewers until that article was published, that country. So if we really want to be serious in Africa, it's not just about funding research and all of that. One, we must be able to make research count for our people. We must make research be valuable. We must also make sure that we minimize and completely eliminate the issue of fraud and scam publications. And then the point is also ensure that there is a high quality of peer review issue. And the last point, before I drop the mic, is that we need to have, and I think, Prof, someone mentioned that, one of the guest speakers, we need to have an alliance of African publishers. Prof, you may have to see what you can. We need to have that. In Asia Pacific, they have. And that actually helps people come together. That actually helps people to have a cohort. They can actually make a strong case, even to government, to the private sector in terms of funding and all of that. Thank you very much, Prof. And once again, congratulations.
Do we have any other questions before we go back to the panelists? Any questions, contributions?
Come on, okay. My name is Edwin Abu. I'm a lawyer. During my practice, I've come across Adonis Abbey. I know them as a reputable publishing company. What I want to say is that I will encourage Adonis Abbey to stop shying away from the political aspect of publication. There is politics in publication, and without the political aspect, we'll be having the kind of problems we are observing here. First, government must take part. If there is no government, the last speaker mentioned what my friend here chorused. What's that again? Connection between the gown and town, as is practicable in China. If it's lacking here, I am of the view that government must play a part for we to have or replicate that in Nigeria or in Africa. And so the former Minister for Education also echoed that. Everything is pointing to the political aspect. And if Adonis Abbey can champion that, and some of the panelists also mentioned that, and that goes to the reputation of Adonis Abbey. So there is a lot on the shoulders of Adonis Abbey, and we encourage Adonis Abbey to take that bold step. Meet ministers of education, government representatives that are purely keen on academic issues and publication. And I think it will move Africa forward. Thank you.
I just want to lend my voice to this conversation. My name is Dr. Carlo Nkalo. I think we'll have to first of all understand that for us to make a headway on the issues of publishing in Africa, there should be a conversation which, like the lawyer said, that Adonis and Abbey can start. A conversation around how government can have a functional policy on publication and publishing in Nigeria. When we do that, it will lead to standardization in the space. And when we do that, it will also give us quality, and then we can now begin to escalate it to other continents. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. That will be all from here. Professor, media, can we please attend to this? Prof, can you hear us and see us?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. What was the question? You are muted. We can't hear you. You are muted.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Questions, suggestions, opinions, they were raised again.
Okay. I think I'll take it to the panel. I think most of what was raised were more of remarks, and I'm not sure if anyone wants to respond, because they're not necessarily questions per se, but remarks. But the panel can always respond if they feel, and if they've got something to add. Prof. Mills?
I just would agree with lots of the questions. There were really strong points. This is a political issue, and it's not simply a question of quality. It's about changing the system. So thank you all for the questions. Really, really good points.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think from the panel this side, all is in order. And there's nothing, we should turn it back to you. Thank you.
Very much, Professor Festina. Let's appreciate and applaud the moderator and panelists for our very insightful webinar. Themes, scholarly publishing in Africa, challenges and opportunities. We appreciate. It is, okay, I think we're rounding up now. Okay, so we're moving on to the vote of thanks, and it will be taken by Mr. Isaac Onyekachi. Mr. Isaac Onyekachi, thank you. Mr. Isaac Onyekachi is the editorial manager of Adonis and Abbey.
Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed speakers, panelists, and participants, those joining us online and present with us here, I'm highly delighted to deliver the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I would like to thank our keynote speakers, Professor David Mills and Dr. Savo Heleta. Thank you for brilliant presentations and introducing us to the complexities and the challenges of scholarly publication in Africa. We thank you for your time. To our amiable moderator, Professor Fosina Yatanga, we thank you for your leadership and moderating the event. To our panelists, Professor Anthony Wafo, Dr. Miriam, Professor Hesham, Professor Aaron, Dr. Muzayan, and Professor Mayele. We thank you for your brilliant discourse and expertise. And to our amiable host, Professor Jidofa Adibe and Anchor Ms. Nkem Adibe, thank you for organizing this webinar. It has been outstanding. I would also like to extend our sincere appreciation to all those who took time to join us in this webinar, those offline and online. We thank you so much for your contributions. It has been insightful. We look forward to engaging furthering this conversation on scholarly publication in Africa. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a safe journey back to your destinations. Thank you.
Okay, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention? I've been made to understand that the staff of Adonis and Abbey have got a surprise for the founder and publisher. If you remember, I did mention that the company was birthed 22 years ago, just a day after 22 years ago, a day after the founder's birthday. So I think the staff have come up with something to appreciate the boss. Please, let's appreciate them.
Good afternoon, everybody. On the 22nd anniversary of Adonis Abbey Publishers Limited, we the staff honor and celebrate Professor Jidofa Adibe. Your vision and exceptional leadership have driven the company forward, and your remarkable achievements are celebrated. Thank you, sir, for your dedication and inspiration.
Present this to you.
So where are the rest of the staff now? It's okay. Stay where you are. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Back outside as we leave. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Those who can see me in cyberspace.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, colleagues.
In a world where fake news online have become commonplace,
telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act.
At the News Chronicle, we stand for the truth, no matter who tells it.
Visit us at www.thenews-chronicle.com.
In a world where fake news online have become commonplace,
telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act.
At the News Chronicle, we stand for the truth, no matter who tells it.
Visit us at www.thenews-chronicle.com.